I was requested to sort of provide a title for my talk, and in an impromptu way, I said Skylark Girl, Myth and Orality and Narratives from Northeast. But of course, I'm not going to talk about the entire Northeast. That is about 200 PhD dissertations. So I'm going to focus on one short story, and I'm going to focus on oral short stories in Assamese. Um, Skylark Girl is actually a retelling. It's a modern retelling of a very popular Assamese short story called Tejimola. Tejimola is a story where the stepmother kills her, but because of some reason, Tejimola refuses to die, and she takes the form of plants, of fruits, of birds, of flowers. And every time her stepmother finds out that these forms that she has taken, which are not human but of plant and animal life, these forms actually are avatars of Tejimola, and the stepmother, who is very jealous and very angry that she's not able to kill her in any form, repeatedly sort of chops the flowers, chops the creeper gourds, chops of the lime tree that she forms into. And these trees also very interestingly, like in a very haunting way, start singing when somebody tries to pluck fruits from them, telling her story. In some ways, she says, "This is what I was done to. This is how my stepmother brutally killed me." The interesting thing is that, and I'm going to elaborate on this later, Skylar Girl is a story that gets repeatedly retold in Assamese popular culture, in the films, in songs. It is a metaphor, and a metaphor of what people feels about political neglect. It is also a metaphor of for people who refuse to die, who refuse to give up on life. And I think in so many ways, because Assam has faced so many turbulence in the last 3 decades or so, and basically since independence, I think this metaphor is a this Tejimala story is reminiscent to the people of Assam as a story that actually talks about the resilience as well as the refusal to give up on life, that we celebrate and recenter life again and again. And that's why the Tejimola story is so important. At the same time, it's a very beautiful story. I'll be very happy to read an excerpt later, but I wanted to also talk about one more thing. I think this adherence to myth and orality in my writing also allows me to assert quite a few things that I think are very unique. For example, I one of the most important things that I can actually assert by drawing from oral culture is actually center oral culture. So centering oral culture enables me to write from a free place, and as someone from a marginalized space, this streak of sovereignty is important to me. This streak of freedom is important to me. We have to remember that oral culture is something that can never be flattened by any kind of colonial experience. Colonial experience has been able to flatten and inflict epistemological violence, on colonized cultures. But because oral culture has so much resilience, they are not able to do that. So I was talking about how oral culture is really important, and it is like a life that takes many forms and continues to thrive, and or it has many clothes, many bodies, new melodies, new language, but it will continue to live. That's the resilience of oral culture. It is impossible to make oral culture decompose by nature. It is like plastic, even though it is not lifeless as plastic. So this is one of the big benefits I draw as a writer from Northeast, as a writer from Assam, that is steeped in the oral imagination, in the oral culture, by centering oral culture. But I want to also talk about a couple of other things that I think are artistically very beneficial for me if I draw from oral culture. By drawing inspiration from my community's oral culture, I achieved two really major things, I feel, and it has been my sort of perennial struggle to actually to achieve these things and try and be loyal to these things. They're very important to me. They're profound. One of the things that I think I can assert is my independence from a misunderstood and racialized culture within the body of Indian English writing. I mean, yes, technically I am an Indian because I hold the Indian passport, and I'm obviously very happy to be an Indian, very proud Indian. I love Indian food and Indian music. But what I'm trying to say is that, I am an Indian English writer technically. But of course, but the truth is that, I'm often also tagged as an Indian English writer, and this is because I write in English. But the truth is that I'm actually a bilingual writer who is Assamese, and I'm an Assamese bilingual writer, just the way Indira Goswami wrote in two languages, but she wrote more in Assamese, and that's why she became known as an Assamese writer. But the truth is, she actually wrote a lot of essays and a whole poetry collection in Assamese. Sujya Kumar Vuya, who is a very well-known writer from Assam, who wrote in English, Bangla, and Assamese, actually predominantly wrote in Assamese, and that's why he was known very much as an Assamese. Some local, some recent developments have also sort of revealed that he was actually a contender for the Nobel Prize for his Assamese and English writings. I didn't know that. I read it in the media. So many great writers in Assam have written in two languages, and I think that one can draw inspiration from the tradition. But I want to explain this further by telling you about my life and growth as a writer. I started publishing in Assamese when I was in high school, actually. So much of the local writing in Assam is sustained by public radio and local newspapers and magazines, where young authors are also invited to read original work. They paid me 150 rupees per short story. I'm talking about 2001, 2000, 1999. It was a big incentive, of course. When I was in college, I started writing for mainstream newspapers, essays, stories, reviews, and a column. I always wrote in two languages. It was a happy accident that my first novel was actually published in English by Penguin. People also think that there is a long gap between 2013, when I published my first novel, The House with 1,000 Stories, and in 2019, when I published my second book in English, which is a collection of short stories. But the truth is that I was never resting. I always wrote short stories. I wrote 3 novellas. I wrote a thesis. I don't know, does a thesis count, a dissertation? Essays, reviews in Assamese. So I have been writing in Assamese for a very long time, almost from 1999, and publishing in Assamese from 2001. It is in 2013 I had my first book out, and that happened to be in English. The second thing I feel I can derive by drawing from oral and print literary traditions is to step out from a predominantly new and a less wealthy literary tradition. And I think you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Indian English literary tradition. It is new and it is nascent. But I have been deeply benefited from quite a few works of Indian English writing, such as The Shadow Lines by Amitabh Ghosh. I think I would also include Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things as another one, and many other books, of course, but these are just happen to be two of my favorites. But these books that I love so deeply from my heart, they only served as a literary permission to me. They didn't pose unique artistic challenges to me. On the other hand, if I remain drenched in Assamese literary traditions, I think I can be a richer writer. Maybe I know, I don't think, I really do know that I can be a richer writer. I can draw from a literary tradition that is more than 1,000 years old and has been in continuation from the 5th century. There's a long continued written and print, not print, but written tradition since the 5th century. And I want to explain this further by talking about how I try to achieve this, because I'm writing in English, publishing, teaching in English, teaching creative writing, while also publishing in Assamese at the same time. I always read in 4 languages on a regular basis when I was growing up: English, Hindi, Assamese, and Bangla. More in English, Assamese, and Bangla, and less in Hindi. Hindi meant me reading a lot of thrillers, pocket books, Hindi pocket books, which were very popular in Assam when I was growing up. But what this meant is that I borrow a lot from non-English literary traditions. Having said that, I must add that English writing is in constant dialogue with Assamese literature in my work. And I want to cite a few examples. For instance, the ending of the title story, His Father's Disease, is an homage to the ending of one of the most widely read novels in Assam. And I won't tell you because the novel is translated to Assamese. And I hope anybody who is listening and is curious will go and find out. The first chapter of my Assamese novel, Noikhon Etia Duroit, which was published in 2020, is in the short story collection as The Love Lives of People Who Look Like Kalpen. I have just changed the names of the characters. So yes, I'm a bilingual writer in that sense. But also the ultimate truth is that I'm an Assamese writer. Well, so that's why I'm not always absolutely thrilled when somebody calls me an Indian English writer, because it does flatten who I am. When I claim to be an Assamese writer, I'm claiming to be part of a longer, richer written tradition that goes back, as I said, to the 5th century, and I can derive inspiration from Shankardeb in poetry of Shankardeb in the 16th century, Azan Fakir, the poetry of Azan Fakir, or the poetry of the lyricism of I Padmapriya, a woman writer who wrote, in the Middle Ages in Assam. And of course, the Bihu folk songs, the Oinitom folk songs, and etc. So I am truly an Assamese writer, but in the most literary and cultural sense, not in a narrow political jingoistic way. I would like to end by talking about a final point and why this stressing of this literary tradition that I draw from is very important and crucial to me. I think when I moved to Delhi in 2004 to study literature, I started reading very widely Indian English writing. Previously, most of my English books that I read were actually Victorian classics or some British modern classics and thrillers, honestly, because they're cheap and we just couldn't afford a lot of the recent Indian English books to read, actually. So I started reading Indian English writing, and I felt completely sort of thrown out of the narratives, even though a lot of them are very engrossing narratives. I just realized that these writers were not talking to me; they were not addressing me. I was not their intended audience, and I think this inaugurates and also introduced me to a very long debate in Indian English writing. Who does the Indian English writer write for? On the other hand, I had come to Delhi University after writing for most of my life, and I had already published some short stories. So to me, that somebody would explain little Indian realities to me when I did not ask for and infantilize me was really sort of troubling, and in some ways hilarious, and in some ways insulting, because it insulted my intelligence and assumed that I wouldn't know what Diwali meant, for example. So I also felt that if I couldn't be free in my imagination, if I couldn't be sovereign in my imagination, when we are actually not sovereign in every other sense of the word outside, if fiction is not a free place, where will I be free ever again in my life? I really stopped writing for a very long time because I couldn't figure out the language and the standards and I just didn't know what to do as a young student, 18 years old, when I had a regular habit of writing. I used to write every day. So I didn't write almost for 2 years. And that changed when I started reading African writers, Chinua Achebe, Bessie Head, Flora Napa, Nadine Gordimer, who was also taught in the course. All these writers, Ngugi wa Thiong'o was very profoundly important for me. His novels, Petals of Blood, Grain of Wheat, and Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, who allowed me to experiment with language and gave me the literary permission and also the artistic challenges that Indian English writers couldn't provide me. That the burden or the lilt of the Assamese language and the weight of the Assamese experience of where I come from can be carried by the English language. So that imaginative and literary sovereignty was very important for me, and that's why I keep on saying, I like to write Assamese novels in English. And again, I actually said that about his work. So I'm deeply in gratitude and in debt to Amitabh Ghosh, of course. So, but at the same time, this imagination, this imaginative sovereignty is important for me for one more reason. I think that when I choose to center the oral experience, which has not been flattened by colonialism, but it is also it continues to thrive, is that I do not center politics and the consequent violence on common people in my writing. It is there always. I do not forget it. I'm always critiquing it, but it is not the central thing in my work. I can't be in because a crisis mode all the time. It also, being in crisis mode also disallows me to create art. You can't create beauty if you repeatedly center violence, crisis, and also, most importantly, it is humiliating for those who have survived. So there is a tradition of writing that celebrates that, especially in Indian English writing, but I'm not interested in that. It is easy to write about people's suffering and shock the readers. I'm interested in a difficult and challenging representation of survival. There are always survivors. I want to honor their stories and their resilience. Again, coming back to the story of Tejimola that I retold, and many other stories in our literary culture, enables me to do that. Finally, I would like to conclude by saying that political conflict is the most natural presence, along with many other things, in Assam. And there is a long series of novels and short stories about life in Assam written by foremost writers that are violent but bloody political conflict. And what it means to live there. And I'm trying to locate myself in the tradition where these questions of what I should write are irrelevant. And I think this is also the reason I talk about through the character of Sanjeev, where people say, why are you writing about this and not writing about that? Why are you centering violence? Why are you centering orality? These questions are irrelevant for many Assamese writers because even though their stories may be about political violence, it is always about centering the stories of survivors. And I think folktales, myth, and orality that have never gone away from our culture, that steeps in our imagination, enables me to sort of repeatedly honor those stories again and again, because folktales never really die. And in fact, the entire story of Tejimola is about a girl who refuses to die. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Why don't you read out an extract of any story of your choice, but especially Skylark Girl.
Okay, sure. Maybe I can read from the story that I just discussed. Right. That will be nice, I guess. Skylark Girl. From this distance, the students sounded like birds chirping. They looked carefree, but they had been busy, sprinting across the campus for classes and lectures during the day, as well as late into the evening. Often, their clothes were crumpled and the men had week-long stubbles. Yet their eyes were still bright and their young faces glistened in the sunlight. In the evening, a light breeze cooled the campus. Students flocked to the local dhaba or the Chinese takeaway for a quick cup of tea, a snack, a late lunch. The trees on the perimeter of the university's 50 acres were no more than 6 feet tall, announcing that they were planted less than a year ago, that the university was new and was trying to make its presence felt through conferences such as the one Sanjeev was here to attend. Last night, when he arrived, driven by a university-employed driver in a Maruti Innova, it was midnight, but many students were still roaming the grounds. As he took charge of his room at the guest house, Sanjeev missed his undergraduate days. He couldn't believe that it was almost 15 years ago. It is around 11 now. He had spent the day attending panels on Indian literature, Dalit literature from Northeast India. And here he was, unable to sleep. The well-lit campus provided no privacy even at night. He found a concrete bench to sit on right under a tall lamp. They ran on solar power. The chief organizer of the conference, a middle-aged man in a black kurta, told them during the Northeast-themed lunch, Naga and Assamese dishes. Sitting on the concrete bench, Sanjeev read aloud the story he had selected for his session for the next afternoon. It felt odd, but he had to read the English translation rather than his own Assamese writing. His English had a thick accent. He halted. How would he tackle questions from the audience? As an undergraduate, he had studied chemistry, but by the time he took his final year exam, Sanjeev had had enough of 40 smells in labs. He decided to enroll for a master's program in Assamese literature. It was a new lease of life. He started writing again and gathered a loyal list of readers for the poems and stories that were published on the department's wall magazine. By the end of his first year, he had not only made it to several mainstream print magazines, but was also elected as the university's magazine editor. It was the most amazing thing that had happened to him. But his mother disagreed. She thought this was the most amazing thing to happen to him, this invitation to read at an international conference. For his mother, Delhi was very far. Delhi meant the army that committed atrocities on the villagers in the 90s. Delhi was for rich people. Its universities were first class. Delhi was the stepmother who treated the people of Assam poorly. That one of those places in Delhi had recognized her son's caliber and invited him to participate in this all expenses paid conference was his life's greatest achievement, she felt. To confirm his participation, he had to email them a draft of one of his stories translated into English. He cycled 6 miles in search of a shop with a computer plugged to an internet connection, because even though there were nearly five major mobile phone companies competing for attention with free data and unlimited talk time, none of them worked properly in his village. But at first, he requested a friend's mother, a professor in the local college. She said that after teaching Keats and Eliot and Shakespeare for 25 years in Assamese to students of English honors who didn't understand English, she didn't have the confidence to translate his story into English. This was a big thing, a matter of great prestige for the town. So she would connect him with someone at Cotton College State University who would be happy to translate it. The four best stories from the conference would be published in an international anthology, and that may be an incentive for this ambitious young colleague of hers. 3 weeks after he received the letter, Sanjeev had traveled to Guwahati, 4 hours away, with his mother's blessings. During the trip, he wondered who had nominated him for the conference. He had in mind a few people, a few possible suspects, but he wasn't sure he wanted to think about it. All he had been told was the nomination letters were sought from experts and editors, and that several literary critics had recommended his powerful stories. And now, here he was, sitting on a concrete bench at midnight, practicing to read a whole story in a language in which he had never spoken a full sentence. 3 weeks before Tejimola's birth, her mother Numoli had eaten so many ripe orange peaches and swallowed so many slippery seeds that she was reminded of her childhood fear. She had strange dreams of becoming a large trunk tamarind, a lanky and weak papaya, a mango tree where ghosts resided. At night, she twitched on her bed. In the morning, when she told her husband, the wandering businessman Dhoniram Haud, he chided her. He said her fears were baseless, and Lumoni disagreed. The dreams were from the morning, and she was facing east then, and she had woken up drenched in sweat. She gave him his cup of tea made from the dried bark of a mature Arjun tree. Aghuni, the tall and large-eyed midwife who'd helped in the delivery in 3 weeks' time, was sitting in the backyard. Later, she told Numoli there was nothing to be afraid of. It wasn't the childhood fear that was haunting her. Her dreams were anticipating the unborn baby. The lush leafy mango tree that she had transformed into in her dreams, standing all alone in a chrome yellow harvested paddy field, signaled a healthy baby, she said. Never before Aghuni had been wrong in her interpretation of dreams, but this time she was. Numoli died giving birth to Tejimola. While cutting the umbilical cord, Aghuni saw tiny light green buds on Numoli, which confused and scared her so much that she removed them hurriedly. But Numoli was bleeding and gasping for breath, and Aghuni didn't know what to do to help her. By the time she had bathed the baby, those buds had started to mature into leaves. She plucked them one by one, like plucking the feathers off the body of a pigeon being prepared for cooking soon. Soon, Numoli's eyelids were covered with parrot green peach leaves. Aghuni plucked each one, bud by bud, leaf by leaf. She scrubbed the baby's skin with powdered lentils only after she had removed all the leaves from the mother's body. Aghuni tried hard to make Numoli look like a normal corpse. She informed Dhoniram Khaud about the birth of his daughter. There was no one else in the labor room. I would end here. Thank you so much for listening.